Hello, class. Today I'm going to talk about points of view and subplots. Once you have established your characters, you have a good idea of what they are, the three dimensions of character, and you have a broad idea of what your A story is, your primary plot, you are going to want to spend some time thinking about points of view and subplots. Now, what is a point of view? A point of view refers to how we, the audience, perceive a scene or a story. Most novels are essentially written in an omniscient point of view, as if God were telling the story from outside the characters. They're often in third person past tense. He did, she went, etc. So it's as if we, the reader, are observing the characters do their story. Some stories in novels are written in first person. Twilight and Hunger Games are good examples of young adult novels that are written in first person. In those cases, we observe the story exclusively from the point of view of the protagonist. Now, movies, while fundamentally omniscient, because we can't get inside characters, we photograph actors from the outside, they tend to explore specific scenes from a single character's point of view. Most commonly, they do scenes from the point of view of the protagonist. In other words, in most films, we experience the story largely as the protagonist experiences it and from their point of view. Having said that, though, most films maintain at least 3 or 4 points of view. In other words, while we primarily experience the movie as the protagonist does, the writer will create scenes in which the protagonist does not appear, and those scenes will service the points of view of other characters. Now, points of view can also be referred to in shorthand as POVs. So I'm going to use that expression here. It means point of view, and you'll hear that often in development meetings. What's the POV? How are we? What POVs are you establishing, et cetera, et cetera. Now, the value of creating and maintaining multiple point of views allow a writer, by cutting back and forth between those points of view, to pace up or slow down a story. It also allows the writer to deepen characters, create contrasting tones for entertainment purposes, and to emphasize and explore themes more powerfully. Now, a good example of points of view at work is the original animated version of The Lion King. What points of view do the Lion King writers Irene Mecke, Jonathan Roberts, and Linda Wolverton use to tell their story? Obviously, Simba. Many of you would have thought of that right away. Scar, the antagonist, is another point of view that's established in The Lion King. Nala, the love interest. Mufasa, the king who dies. And Rafiki, the priest, who's got a small point of view, but it is indeed established. Each of these characters fulfills certain roles: protagonist, antagonist, and love interest. When choosing points of view to establish, writers commonly use certain roles, indeed these ones, the protagonist, the antagonist, the love interest, but also they might use others: best friend, the confidant. So roles are one way to establish what points of view you're going to use. Thriller and horror movies nearly always use the point of view as of the antagonist significantly. So one of the choices you have to make is, what point of views are you going to establish? One of the ways you might do that is assessing what roles these points of view have in your movie. Okay? Now, generally, all points of view are established in the first act of a film. And what really is being said here is a point of view. The establishment of a point of view is the equivalent of creating a film's world. It's really part of that task. How is this world seen? Who is experiencing it? And you are essentially introducing the characters through whose eyes you're going to see this story and experience this world. Now, you can violate this rule, but it's tricky. If you're going to create a point of view beyond Act 1, you are taking a big dramatic, you're making a big dramatic choice. And when an audience finds a new point of view that happens after Act 1, they're going to experience it either as they are going to be confused, or if you write it correctly, it's going to have great dramatic impact. So it's a kind of great dramatic surprise, but it better be worth it. A classic example of a kind of point of view that's established after Act 1 would be a really, really evil protagonist. A really, really evil antagonist. The guy behind the guy who's pulling the levers. And this would have to be established very effectively and kind of built up to if you were going to do it after Act 1. Now, shifting points of view tend to be strongly associated with subplots. Generally, points of view are the people who are in points of view that are different than the protagonist, although the protagonist's point of view can also be involved with a subplot. But if you've established points of view, often those are the characters in your subplots. Now, what is a subplot? First, you've got to understand what the primary plot of your movie is, and that is in development often referred to as the A plot. And it is the story of the core conflict the protagonist experiences with the antagonist. So in Lion King, the core conflict is Simba versus Scar. How will Simba survive Scar's deadly trickery and eventually defeat Scar to take back the Pride Lands? That is the A plot, the primary plot, and the core conflict to The Lion King. The subplots are stories that may relate to the primary plot, but have different protagonist, antagonist, and conflicts. And you could also say or between all those words. In development, these plots are often referred to as the B, C, and D plots. Most movies have at least 2, if not 3 or 4 subplots. And as implied above, these subplots often involve those characters with whom the writers have established points of view. In The Lion King, these subplots would include Mufasa versus Scar. Note that the antagonist Scar wins this subplot when he manages to kill Mufasa. Nala versus Simba. This is a romantic subplot. Simba versus Timon and Pumbaa. This is a comic relief story. What do you say? You say, what's the conflict here, really, in fact, between Simba and Timon and Pumbaa? The reality is Simba doesn't immediately want to go with Timon and Pumbaa and is sort of seduced into it by them. And then he spends time being something of a dilettante with them. So he's not fulfilling his destiny, and there's always going to be tension is that Simba, by hanging out with Timon and Pumbaa, isn't doing what he's supposed to. But the beauty of it is this subplot provides some comic relief to a story that's pretty dark. Then we have Scar versus the hyenas, which is really not a big subplot, but eventually Scar reaches his fate and is paid off by the hyenas' evilness. And then Rafiki versus Skad or Scar. Now that's a subtle subplot, but there's a sense of Rafiki as a priest who is seeking something better for the Pride Lands and is waiting for God to provide it. And there is tension in that subplot. Will Rafiki get what he wants? Now, note that not all these subplots include the protagonist. Also note that, again, as I said, they allow the writers to reach for different tones, romantic, comic, spiritual, and other tones that you could do that don't comfortably match in the primary plot's tone. By doing so, by using these subplots well, they deepen the film's thematic power and create more fun for the audience, which is the point. Each subplot, crucially, is a story in itself with a protagonist, an antagonist, a core conflict, and a climax. It's crucial that you as a writer understand these elements of your subplots. In other words, before you start writing your script, you should know what, beating out your outline, you should know exactly what point of views you're going to establish and what subplots you're going to use, and you're going to must be able to say the protagonist is A in this subplot, the antagonist is B in this subplot, the core conflict is C in this subplot, and the climax looks like this. You must know that. So you must have the story of each subplot in your mind and written down. Subplots are woven around and through the A plot. When scenes service both the primary plot and a subplot, i.e. the plots coincide in a specific scene, the writer increases the drama in that scene, which is the entire point of well-told stories and good drama, right? So it's how the subplots weave into and coincide with the A story that create real dramatic power for a movie. Now, and as an example of this, in The Lion King, when Nala challenges Simba to return to the Pride Land, it's inherently dramatic because this scene services both the A plot, which is that to some degree, Simba must go back to the Pride Land to challenge Scar, and the subplot of Nala's and Simba's romance. If he doesn't return, then she doesn't want to have anything to do with him. Hence, this scene has great dramatic weight. Both the romantic story and the A plot come together in this scene. Now, ideally, though it's not essential, a screenwriter's goal in a movie is to have all subplots reach their climax at the same time as the climax of the primary plot. The goal is to create a climax that is as dramatic as possible. So the more subplots that we can have coincide with this sequence, the better. Having said that, while it's a worthy goal, it's perfectly reasonable to conclude smaller subplots at other points in the movie. As we mentioned, Scar kills Mufasa, and that's the end of that story. Having said it, it's highly dramatic because it's what sets Simba off onto his journey. Crucially, though, by movie's end, all subplots must be paid off and they must conclude. There can be no strings that are left untied or unwrapped. Okay? So that's the lesson on points of view and subplots.